for joining us this morning for our conversation. Thanks, Roger, for being here.
Morning, Amy. Morning, everybody.
We're glad to be in the same room this week.
Yes, it's a nice change.
After a couple of Zoom conversations. So we are talking about 10 values to the modern family. And we're using this book, More Than Words, as kind of a prompt. As we've said a couple of times, she has some thought-provoking things, some of which we wouldn't necessarily agree with. But they are good for discussion and conversation. So each week we talked about a value that just about every family, I would say, not even a faith-based family, would say, yes, we want that as part of our family values. And so this week she talks about community and how community and having community with others and neighboring, intentional neighboring, is a value that a family would hold.
Absolutely. And yeah, it's a short chapter that she writes about, but it's a good chapter, and so enjoyed it.
Yeah.
So looking forward to discussing a few of our things and what we can bring home for everybody.
Yeah, me too. She talks a lot about, as clergy, and something that I immediately resonates with me, is moving to a new place and having to find community. Which many of you have probably moved to new places and have found yourself in that place. Of trying to find, amidst all the other things that you're doing, trying to find community. And one of the things she points out, that a lot of us move for a new job. And so you get boots on the ground and you're immediately supposed to impress because you're on display and you're trying to build community within your coworkers and you learn but you're also just trying to find the pediatrician and the school and the church and the mechanic and the unpacked boxes, and how overwhelming that period of time is. For someone in a new community. And so that resonated with me as someone who has moved for church, church positions, that is hard, and you have to be intentional about
Although
it.
She does point out that at least you don't have to worry about finding
That's
the church.
right.
The church is, you can check that one off the
That's
list.
one thing I don't have to find, is find a church. So that's a good thing. I did like what she said. I learned the spiritual discipline of talking to strangers, and that was part of how she built community when she moved to a new place. That's something I struggle with, is talking to strangers, because I am introverted, and it's very intimidating to me to be that presence to come to someone, a stranger. So
yeah, but there's certain things that you can find that are a little more easy, like if you find that little favorite restaurant or coffee shop and you can start talking with the staff there, or things like that make it a little bit easier. And of course, we're going to get into neighbors here shortly.
Right. Yeah. So she talks, and I think this was written pre-pandemic. It's especially relevant right now, about how, she says that it's not just people that move to other places that feel lonely and isolated. She says that we're living in a time of great cultural isolation. That just think about how many things in our daily lives are designed so we don't have to deal with people face to face. And she names some examples. Automatic garage door openers. Right. You drive right into your garage, go in your house, shut the garage door. Fast food, coffee shops with drive-thrus, banks, online banking, drive-through dry cleaners, or those dry cleaners that come to your house and pick it up off your porch, and we can all think of all the things. And right now, we're working from home. Yeah. And we're using curbside and delivery, and some of our kids are still at home. Right.
Remote classrooms, and she talks about that. And even now, how many kids do you know, or I say kids, college students, that they're even doing college work online. Yeah. Even pre-pandemic, they were doing college courses online. And so there's not that classroom interaction anymore with anyone.
Yeah, though we've become more efficient, what we've lost is the forced community moments. And someone who is introverted and gets annoyed by lines, I praise those things, like the delivery and the curbside and the online, but it does create more isolation from others.
And sometimes, like in the classroom, you've been on group projects before and things, and especially at the college level, but there's a synergy that happens when you're there together, and all of a sudden ideas start flowing. Yeah, you just don't do that.
You can't get it on it. You can't get it on a Zoom call.
And that's what most businesses that I've talked with too. That in business people, that they have that same problem right now. If they can't meet in person, that there's just not that synergy there.
Right. And I think that absolutely relates to the workplace. And we, as a church staff, long before we even opened up the building for anything, realized real quick that we couldn't do collaborative ministry if we weren't sitting in the same room. And we could do it safely in a big open room with masks, but it just is not the same. It's not community, not the same community on Zoom.
Right.
She mentioned some about the phenomenon of worship services. You know those churches that, as Pastor Phillips on Saturday said, they're dark and loud. But we all can think of those mega churches, those big box, I call them kind of box churches, where you can go in anonymously and sit in a dark room and participate in worship on your own terms and then leave anonymously. And there's a lot of people that's very appealing to them, but they miss all the community to it. And I think some of that can happen here today with our worship service. If you haven't been in-person worship, you should come. Because we talk about that synergy, and even from 6 feet apart or more, that synergy is still there. And talking to other people in the hallways and the parking lots and waving at people and just being in the presence of other church family members cannot be replicated online.
And you just, not that you can't feel the Spirit of God at your home, but there's something about when you're sitting in the sanctuary in collective worship that you just feel God's presence even more.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you haven't done that yet and you're feeling comfortable coming, I feel incredibly comfortable with what we're doing and the precautions we're taking. I would encourage you to come because I think it can be even more isolating the longer this goes on, that it can become really easy for us to become complacent and say, I just want to stay at home in my PJs. But we miss this community.
Right.
So when we do that. So, that's one of the great things about church is it's an opportunity for you to meet people without having to talk to strangers at a coffee shop. It's a little more comfortable. So she talks, like every chapter talks about practicing this at home, this value, and practicing this value in community. And really, I feel like it's kind of one and the same this week. So what are some things about building community at home and community that you picked up on or you thought of?
She gave an excellent example of a lady who had moved into a new neighborhood, and so she had bought a fire pit, put it out back, and she gave an open invitation to the neighbors for s'mores. And so pretty soon by the end of the summer she had 50 neighbors over and for s'more parties at the fire pit. And I know with COVID, obviously, we've been restricting the size of our groups and things like that, but our neighbors have enjoyed doing that too. We have a fire pit out back, and the neighbors we've been gathering in the evenings, and it's been, great to do community, and we've gotten to know some of our neighbors even more in this last year than we've known since, pre-COVID.
Yeah.
So, which is a beautiful thing, a good thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it is an interesting time in that we have to be a little more creative and intentional about building community. But I think it's almost like we had this great 1-year pause where we paused some of the busyness and forced ourselves to decide, what are we going to move forward with? And I know my family has decided that we're not going to go back to what we did. We've had this time to kind of recenter ourselves and try and prioritize. And so with that, I think that we have opportunities to be more intentional about building quality community. And if we, if we don't stack our calendar full of all the stuff that we used to, then we have those slots to be more intentional. So things like inviting people over or meeting at a play date. We have once a month, we have a playground play date here at the church. We've got a great playground here. We don't even need to go to the city park, and so once a month, on a Saturday morning, you just come. There's no agenda. You just come, and children are playing together, and the adults can visit together in a safe environment. And those are kind of it's so easy, to do those kind of things and just invite someone to meet you at the park.
Yeah, and I know some of our community groups are starting to meet outside together. We've met with some other couples outside and had dinner on a pool deck or things like that.
Yeah.
And so we're starting to come together, and as the vaccine gets rolled out, hopefully, and when school gears up in the fall, will be a great time to start, even gathering the small groups back in the building, and I think the CDC will relax things.
Yeah.
And we'll get that sense of community back.
Yeah, I think so too. So I would love to hear from you as far as, have you found yourself to feel more isolated, especially right now, And how are you being intentional about reaching into your community and building some relationships right now? Because I think there's some great ideas out there that we could borrow and do ourselves.
Right, exactly.
So
she makes this statement at the end of that section about home is the art and practice of hospitality can be both pastoral care and self-care. When you make room at your table or your fire pit for friends, neighbors, strangers, there's a great opportunity for transformative witness. It is a good time for witness. We've had many discussions with our neighbors about church.
Yeah.
You know, they're not in the building with us yet, but
right.
they brought up church. Where do you go to church?
Yeah.
And we've been able to talk.
Yeah, I mean, I think the reality is almost all of us came to know Christ because of a relationship we had with someone else who already did. And very few people respond from a cattle call kind of thing. It's from a relationship with somebody. That's how they're going to learn about this person, you know, that we call Jesus Christ. And that's how they're going to learn about him. And they're going to watch us and they're going to get to know us. And so that kind of relationship, if we don't have any of those relationships, then we can't, you know, share that. I actually attended a church back when I was in seminary that was really pushed intentional neighboring and really encouraged people to consider moving into areas of the city that didn't look like them and just be intentional in being a good neighbor. Not passing tracts out. Right. Not trying to get them to pray a prayer. But just being a good neighbor. And the trickle down of that was building relationships. And often it led to a decision. But even if the person was already a Christian, it still built intentional neighborhood relationships between different people that never would be neighbors otherwise.
Sure.
A different demographic and that kind of stuff. And I think we often think about people that are like us. But taking this idea of community and stretching it beyond our circle. And we share the love of Christ through that, but we also are just a good neighbor. So, yeah, I love that idea of just, you know, building relationships and friendships with people that aren't just in our circle. So. And
it's good to do that with the church too. Obviously,
absolutely.
And the church needs to be not all people like us as well.
Right.
And so that's...
Right. Yeah, I was thinking this morning about of all the places that we do life, school and work and that kind of stuff, especially for children, they always are in a different group every year. So they're in this school class, and then the next year they're in a different class with a different teacher, and they're on this soccer team, and the next year they're in, and their little group changes almost on a yearly basis. But church is one of the few places where that doesn't change, which means they have that relationship they have the opportunity to build a relationship that lasts more than a year. And if you think about it, all the people that play a role in our child's life usually are segmented into like a school year. But how many places other than their family do they have the opportunity to build a lifelong relationship with someone? But the church. Yeah. And they don't find that unless they're here at church. Right, exactly. And they're intentional about being here, and we as a church are intentional about building those cross-generational relationships to where your child does build a relationship for years to come. Absolutely. And we have a revolving door. Yeah. Those of us that grew up in church, and we've got church grandparents that, you know, I mean, all along were with us, and unfortunately, when you get to be my age, a lot of them have passed on at this point. Right. But when I was a child, I had many church grandparents. Absolutely. And those are relationships and community that you can't replicate anywhere else. And they're priceless. They're just priceless. And that's how children learn who God is through the actions and the people that they are surrounded by. And so it goes back to community happens in person at church a lot of times. And so having your family involved, you know, come fall when things maybe are a little safer would be helpful. So, yeah. So next she talks about neighboring and community. And so, you know, what can we do in order to meet new people that are coming into our community, new people that move in for jobs? Obviously, then, you know, the children have started to school, and, you know, how can we go ahead and find ways to intentionally interact with them and to greet them and to make them feel welcome, you know, whether it's bringing a fruit basket or, you know, a meal or just something like that in order to intentionally start that conversation going and to make that relationship. Right. Yeah, she talks about how she's like the complete opposite of a typical PTA parent. and she doesn't want to be involved in any of this stuff, but she found that is one way to be be intentional about neighboring and being part of the community, was to be involved at the school level. And if you're involved at the school level, then you really are come face to face with people of all different demographics, especially if you're in the public school system. And you get to know that refugee family that moved into our community, and you get to know that mom who relocated here for a new job, or you know the different graphics, and allows you to really get to know people in that way. So but I think a lot of us think we can't take on one more thing. Right. So I think it's prioritizing. How do I want to be intentional about building community in my family, and then what something's got to give. What can give so that I can do that. And so I can pass that on to my child, that building community is important. So, yeah.
Excellent. What other ways to do that too would be, obviously work groups, Rotary Club, Kiwanis, all those great organizations there. Volunteer opportunities, like Aimee said, with the school or outside, just working. And then it'd be a great ministry for the church. And I don't even know how you do this anymore, but if we could even get through the Chamber of Commerce a list of new people moving in, or something like that, or a local realty association. Right. But it'd be a great outreach for our church that would be something to think about too, of how we could welcome new people into St. Petersburg in our community and
Yeah, I find especially here in St. Peter in Florida, there's a lot of people moving in and out. It seems I don't talk to very many natural born Floridians because it's a lot of people that relocate here, but it gives us a great opportunity. Our community is constantly changing and growing. And so there's this constant opportunity for us to neighbor and build relationships with people. And we all grow more when we come face to face with people that are different than us.
Sure, absolutely.
So, and then she talks about Scripture quite a bit, neighboring Scripture, which we all know. Jesus was the ultimate teacher of what it is to be a neighbor. But she said something that I had not really thought of this way, and I really, really liked it. She's talking about at the Last Supper that Jesus was having with his disciples. And he knew that his end was coming. He knew that he was going to die soon. And he may not have known when, but he knew that this was one of his last meals with his disciples. And she says, with everything coming apart at the seams, there's so much more he might have given them. And in the days ahead, they would be haunted and wondering why he hadn't. Why didn't he leave them an itinerary, telling them where to go next? Why didn't he leave them with some secret weapon, some divine force that would keep them safe from their adversaries? Why didn't he at least tell them what that fig tree parable was about, or teach them that cool party trick with the water and the wine? But he didn't. Instead, he broke bread, and he poured some wine, and he gave them to each other. He left them in each other's care. And isn't that all we need to know? We belong to each other. In his last words spoken from the cross, he did the same thing when he asked his best friend to take care of his mama, and his mama to feed his friend. Woman, here's your son. Friend, here's your mother. That one line is why I wind up a weepy hot mess on Good Friday every single time. He gave them to each other. He gave them all to each other and to us by extension. And I love that.
I love that too. I really enjoyed the analogy of the Lord's Supper being about community.
Yes, absolutely. We can do communion at home as a family, but I think his intention, and I think what we glean so much more when we do it as community together. Even if we use I call them the little go-go cups, the little communion Lunchables. And even if we're not passing the elements, we're still participating together and building community together. I resonate so much with this. I don't know why I never thought of that from the disciples' perspective. I might use it in a sermon sometime about how every time we've left a job, for the most part, unless we burn the place down on the way out, we prepared people for our departure. We showed them how we did things. We gave them the files. We prepared. I always probably over-prepared, show them every single thing because I don't want to leave them in a lurch. And the disciples probably felt the same way. What do you mean you're leaving?
Right.
Why aren't you leaving us some instructions? What are we supposed to do? And he didn't. He didn't give them, and I never really thought about that. The disciples probably were like, well, what are we supposed to do now? Yeah. And all he did was just give them each other. So, in that community.
It built community, though, in the end, because they when we get into Acts then, after that, then, especially Acts chapter 2, where the churches come together and they're listening to Peter preach, and all of the sudden, the Spirit of God comes upon them, and they have Pentecost, and then they get into that great part of the end of chapter 2 where they sell their possessions and they feed each other and they take care of each other.
Live in community together. Yeah, the early church. And we've lost so much of that through the years.
Yes.
We've lost some of that that was clearly the beginning of church. And and when I was in seminary, there was some seminarians who decided to adopt that lifestyle and literally pulled all their resources and lived together. There was about 6 or 7 of them, some married couples even, and lived like that. Now, I don't know if they're still living like that.
Right.
My guess is probably not. But it was interesting how they thought, let's try it.
Sure.
They found it to be scriptural, certainly is, and thought, let's see what this is, life together, literal life together. Most of us Americans would like to not live with other people.
Correct.
And share a household. But in other cultures, it is not unusual for multiple households to live in the same house and multiple generations and live in community together, and we're just not very good at that.
No.
We like our space.
Yes. But we can learn to do certain things together with that. And I know it's the same thing of certain seminaries that I've heard of where they at least require like one night a week. You must spend time together. You must share a meal together. You must commune together to build those relationships. And it's a great thing for all of us.
It really is. It is. And when what can start out as a forced discipline ends up a spiritual discipline. Because once you do it, it becomes part of your life together. And something as easy as using that example of the second Friday night of every month, we're going to go to dinner with this couple.
Yep.
And there's some weeks where you're like, oh, I really wish I could stay home on Friday night. But when we force that, sometimes it becomes a good habit. Well,
and once we get past, once again, COVID, but how much our church even enjoyed the Sunday dinners after. I mean, that got to be a big event before we had to shut down. And everyone truly enjoyed the sense of community and getting to talk and visit after or around a meal.
Right, yeah. We all like a meal, shared meal. Absolutely. We are Baptists after all.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, I think, I took away from this chapter something as an introvert and a homebody who did not hate quarantine because it spoke my love languages there, that it challenged me to be more intentional because it is super easy to do the drive-through curbside, especially with a strapped-in toddler in the back that's like wrestling an alligator in his car seat. It is easy to become completely complacent and become very insular.
Sure.
And your community only is those that you have to talk to. And so for me, it was a challenge. I think for some people, they are natural community builders. And I'm drawn to those kind of people, but also overwhelmed by those people. But we need those kind of people in our community that are rounding people up and making sure people are connected. But for me, it was a challenge that this is a value I want in my family. I want Harrison to have meaningful connections with people, not just at church. I want him to have meaningful connections in our community that don't look like him and act like him and live like us. And the only way to do that is for me to get off the couch and to put down the Netflix remote and be intentional about it. So it was challenging for me.
So I found it to be a very good chapter. Also, with my job, I've been out and about, so I have not, had to be quite as intentional with, building relationships and that type of thing. But it's a good reminder for me to take time. And my life, actually, I think, got almost even busier with COVID because schedules got spread out and more days working and things like that. But so I need to remember though to build the little relationships and to take that extra time because yes, right now I am tempted to run through the drive-through because it's the fastest way. And sometimes too, your emotional energy is expended and I just don't want to deal with one more person, which isn't good either, and you have to check those motives as well. So I think, I would love to hear what other people are doing to try and do this. I thought it was a good reminder that we are meant to live in community. Jesus set that example for us very clearly. It was very clear about who is a neighbor and spoke. But I think the American culture doesn't lend itself as easily. So we have to be a little more intentional with that. So. Yeah, definitely looking forward to normalcy.
Yes.
And being able to get back and enjoy those relationships even more
Absolutely. So, great. Thanks for joining us this week.
Thank you, and we'll see you next week.